Hey guys, this week we're going to be looking at prejudice, and if you've taken a look at the chapter, it's one of the longer chapters in the unit, in the class. But the reason for that is there's just so much information that's going to go into it. We're going to get into talking about and reading about racism, gender discrimination, differences between different countries in terms of these types of behaviors. So there's a lot of information, and it's interesting. It's pretty convoluted. Some of it seems to really go together well and mesh well and make sense with what we already know, and then there's some of it that kind of stands off to the side and is more of its own information. So first, let's take a look at some definitions, and I'm going to read them from my notes as opposed to saying them off the top of my head, because I don't want to mess with what you've got going on in terms of the textbook. So I think of prejudice as kind of this umbrella term, and underneath it are going to be stereotypes and discrimination. So we can talk about prejudice itself as a preconceived negative judgment of a group and its individual members. And within that idea is, first of all, the idea that we're in at least one group, gender, so male or female, and that there's obviously going to be another group. So if I'm a female, I'm in the female in-group, meaning that when I think about myself and other women, that is the in-group. Whereas when I think about men, that's going to be an example of an out-group, right? So for me, personally, in-group would be women, and then out-group would be men. So we could also talk about that in terms of race. We could talk about it in terms of people who wear glasses and people who don't wear glasses, people who are married and people who aren't married. So an in-group is really based upon your current groups, what you belong to, and then the out-group would be the kind of the opposite or the other side of that. And so underneath prejudice, we've got stereotypes, which are really the cognitive aspect to negative thoughts and behaviors about others. So we can talk about stereotypes as the belief about the personal attributes of a group of people. So when you say people with glasses are smarter, when you think that Asians are better at math, really what we're talking about are stereotypes. Now, stereotypes can be overgeneralizations. So if we think about a generalization, meaning that there's going to be a certain number of people within a group that are a certain way, no matter what you do. But if we talk about overgeneralization, really what we're saying is that we've taken this small group of people and said that all people in that in-group are similar and all do that. So an overgeneralization is going from a really small number to believing this about all people. And we can also say that stereotypes can be completely inaccurate. Stereotypes can also be partially accurate. Stereotypes can be, very accurate, but at the same time, you really have to know your research evidence in order to know whether or not your stereotype is accurate. We also know that stereotypes are very resistant to new information. So if I have a stereotype about blacks, if I have a stereotype about Asians, a lot of times I don't interact with the people in my stereotypes often, so I don't get the opportunity to test them to see whether or not they're accurate. But also when I do have the opportunity to test them, I go into that situation expecting to be found correct. So what I do is I start looking for that information that shows me that Asians behave in this manner, or that people from Puerto Rico behave in this way. And I disregard the information that actually indicates that I may not be correct. Remember we talked about previously, I'm always right, says everybody. So we were looking for information that makes us look right as opposed to the information that would make us look wrong, because then that's just bad, right? So we can also talk about discrimination. That's the behavioral part of prejudice. So this is unjustified negative behavior towards a group or its members. So we can talk about overt discrimination, where we say negative things to other people, to women, to men, to blacks, to whites, to Asians, to Latinos. We can talk about it in terms of hiring behaviors. So a prejudicial, a person that is discriminating in hiring behaviors may only hire people that are of a similar race to themselves and may have a negative stereotype about others. So we see that discrimination is going to happen in lots of different spheres, in jobs, in who we choose to be friends with, and how we respond to students in our classrooms sometimes can even be based upon discriminatory practices. Now, if I discriminate, does that mean that I obviously hold these negative stereotypes? Let's think about that. Now, we've talked previously about conformity. If I conform, does that necessarily mean that I have accepted the ideas of that conformity? It doesn't. It only means that I'm changing my behaviors, but it doesn't mean that I necessarily have changed my thoughts, right? So it's possible to discriminate, maybe because we've learned that that's the norm, and because we're conforming, and not hold negative stereotypes about that group. So if you start looking through this chapter, you're going to see lots of really interesting stuff. We're going to learn about stereotype threat, which is the idea that people who typically experience negative stereotypes, when they're reminded of those negative stereotypes, do poorly. So, for example, there's a stereotype that girls are bad at math. So if I'm a woman and I'm taking the SAT, and right before the SAT, my coach says to me, oh, don't worry about it, you're not going to do so hot on the SAT anyway because you're a girl and girls don't do well at math, then I'm more likely to do poorly on that test because I've been reminded of that stereotype. That's what we call stereotype threat. And there's going to be lots of other interesting information in this chapter. I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys' responses to what you're learning. Again, as always, if you have any questions, let me know, and I'm looking forward to seeing your discussion board posts for this week. Thanks.